What's the worst example of bad parenting you've ever witnessed? A mother let her kid play in the stream of wood chips coming out of a wood chipper and yelled at the guy who was cutting down trees because he told the kid to get away from it. She was on her phone the whole time. There could have been nails and stones in that wood that could have hit the kid, but nope, it was the bloke's fault for chipping wood and not letting the kid play in it. I went to breakfast with a good friend and a friend of a friend. We pick up the friend of a friend who brings her 3-year-old son along. The kid is crying and making all kinds of noise. The mother responds by telling the kid that I have a gun, and if he doesn't calm down I was going to shoot the kid. First-hand account. My mom would let me work during the summer from 7, and when I came back to the hotel room she'd pay for another night, get me a MC chicken, and then do heroin while I watched TV. This happened many years ago, when I was about 10 or so. My mom's ex-friend, we'll call her Patty for the sake of this story. Well, one day, there's a knock at the door and mom goes and opens it to find Patty's son John, also not his real name, who was only about 5 years old at the time. His mom is sitting in the car in our driveway, and he's just standing there by himself. My mom says, "Hey there John. What brings you guys here today?" Little John then replies, "Mom said to ask if you have a can." Mom says, "A can? Like a soda can?" John says, "I dunno. She said she needs a can so she can smoke her crack." My mom, who was most certainly not any sort of angel herself, fumes with anger over this. She says, "John, go inside and play with me. Close the door and don't look outside." So John comes in and I put some cartoons on for him to watch. I then peek out the window whilst he is occupied with the show. My mom is screaming at Patty through her open car window. I couldn't hear what was being said, but they were both screaming at each other. And then my mom punches Patty in the face through the open window, pulls open her door, drags her out of the car onto the drive-away pavement and beats the ever-living sin out of the woman. After she finally lets Patty go, Patty gets up, gets into her car, and drives away, with her son still in our house. Luckily, my mom was friends with Patty's brother-in-law, which is how we knew her in the first place, and she called him, who in turn called the kid's grandpa, since he himself was at work, to come and pick him up. Grandpa apologized profusely for Patty's behavior and took John home with him. Your mom is a badass. I was a lifeguard for 4 years in my teens. Long story short, parents expect the lifeguards to do their job for them. Either they just drop their kids off, or they don't pay attention. Background: this was a city pool. We didn't have too many terrible things, but we still saw our fair share of weird shit. Begin. This guy, let's call him Guy, probably late 20s early 30s, dove head first into the pool. The kiddie pool very shallow. I saw it, blew the whistle, and gave him a head shake. He acknowledged, rubs his chest, because he scraped it on the bottom, and I thought it was over with. 5 minutes later, he dives headfirst into the kiddie section of the pool 2 feet. I blow the whistle, call him over, and talk to him sternly about how I'm not reprimanding him for any other reason than that I don't want to have to backboard him for a spinel. Guy agrees, says it was stupid, apologizes and walks away. Cue duck up number 3. Guy walks away from me, over to the 6-foot water slide we have for the little kids. This is the cutest water slide, but still towers over its primary users, 2-year-olds. Along his way to the slide, Guy scoops up what I assume is his son, and puts him at the top of the slide still standing up. This kid couldn't be more than 2-3 years old, had floaters on and all. Guy points at me, and over the regular pool ruckus, I hear him yell, "See that lifeguard? He told me he wants you to jump off the side of the slide." He then proceeds to point at the concrete. I see the kid's knees buckle as he goes to jump, and my heart sinks like a rock to my stomach. I immediately shoot out of my chair and yell, "Hey, I. 2 things of note. 1. As a guard, you're never to stand on your tower unless you see someone in apparent danger. This is so other guards have a clear sign that something's going down, and to pay attention, get help. 2. I have a deep voice, a very deep voice. I'm quiet often, but when I get pissed, I utilize it to my advantage. What one of my friends later described as the voice of God echoes put across the pool. and the entire place falls quiet. Guy immediately puts his son down on the ground and starts walking towards me. I call over my manager, explain it all, and she, not the brightest of managers, tells him he will be removed by the police after any other incidents. He apologizes, then goes on about his pool experience. 2 hours later, I'm in the 5-foot section, deepest aside from the 12-20-foot sections. Guy is walking along with friends, sees me in the chair, and goes, "Watch this." I'm still surprised he didn't say "hold my beer" instead. He runs and dives in really deep, duck up numero cuatro, reporting for duty, in front of his son, who was behind the legs of some other bro, and peeks out after his dad submerges. Guy floats up to the surface of the pool face down and unresponsive. We had to evacuate the pool, stabilize and backboard him. Guy kept entering his name into Darwin's lottery, and won. In a grocery store, and I see a probably 5-year-old walk across the apple display, taking a bite out each apple on the bottom row. Look around, then place the apple back with the bite out of view. I stood there with my jaw dropped, waiting for her parents to do something. Finally the woman saw me, looked at the kid, and said, "Gasp Midger, no," and promptly turned around and continued to let her do it. My sister was worried that her 7-year-old son wasn't at the level as the other kids, and considered holding him back a year. She didn't end up going through with it, but my brother-in-law found this development super funny and kept openly mocking his own son until his own son starting crying his eyes out and needing a hug. I was absolutely horrified that his own father was acting like a schoolyard bully. I work in a foster home. We had a kid that was incredibly good at making paper airplanes. Like, he could make one and tell you how far it would go, which way it would turn, how many flips it would make, etc. before he ever threw it. I asked him one day how he learned, and he said, "Whenever my parents shouted at me, I would just go to my room and make paper airplanes." That kid made a lot of ducking airplanes. Turns out he was one of the worst cases our DHS had ever encountered in the county he was from. I was driving along my street when this 4-6-year-old kid rolls out of a driveway on a tricycle. I come to a stop and wait for him to get out of my way, as he seemed to be doing. His mother runs down the driveway and just starts screaming at me rather than get her kid out of the road. Another car comes up behind and without waiting just goes around, clipping the kid's tricycle, knocking him on the ground, and the lady just screams at me even more. She wouldn't stop or get out of the way. I finally just held my horn down till she gathered her kid up and got out of the way. I work at a fast food restaurant, and while what I see probably isn't what most people would consider the worst, I still see quite a bit of bad stuff going on. A lot of loud parents yelling at kids, kids that look dirty, kids without proper clothing in bad weather, just everything. Not necessarily the worst, but depressing in some ways. Overheard a woman tell her child in a condescending manner, "Don't be stupid, lizards don't lay eggs," whilst in the reptile house at London Zoo during a zookeeper talk. An irate mother of a girl in a private school's music program made a big scene in front of the faculty and students because her daughter had not been selected to sing a solo in a school concert. The student had been very clear to the faculty that she didn't want the part, nor was her voice suited for it. Still, her overbearing mother insisted that she audition against her will. As a result, the girl was yanked out of the school she loved by her parents and embarrassed, all because the mother's ego required that her daughter be the shining star in front of others. Lived under some horrible people for 8 months. They would have parties in the middle of the week till 2 or 3 AM, regularly, but one particular disturbing story, their girl around 10, 12, was having regular night terrors. She would wake up screaming. We lived in the basement, their bedrooms were on the 2nd floor, so a whole story between us, and we could hear the dad stomping down the hallway and slam open the door and start screaming at the top of his lungs, "You better knock it off. Stop crying, you shithead. They are nothing but ducking dreams. You hear me, dreams. It's nothing worth crying over." Worst neighbors ever. We never felt sorry that our dog barked all day. He hated them. When their kids started crying, our dog started to cry and whine and howl in sympathy. But the adults he would bark and snarl at loved people of all ages. That dog, I could trust his instincts of a good human. I know downright tragic examples of horrifying parenting, but they are such downers. I'll go with a story which has more of a slightly humorous element to it. I'm at a red light in the right hand lane. Right hand turns on red are legal where I'm. There's a car coming, but it's a ways away. I turn right and cross into the left hand lane as the incoming car was driving in the right hand lane, and I didn't want to have to accelerate too fast. The upcoming car slows down to my speed. Woman hangs out of the driver's side window with a beer in one hand that's on the wheel and a cigarette in the other as she's flipping me off, and says, "Be careful, Methodica. I've got kids in the back." Then she sped off well above the speed limit. A woman on the bus told her approximately 6-year-old son to tell an approximately 11-year-old schoolgirl to move out the way, but referred to the girl as that fat cow. I lost it. Probably displaying pretty bad parenting skills myself as I was taking my son to school, but I couldn't let it pass. I don't think what you did is that bad. I mean, losing your cool is not ideal, but you showed your son that you are willing to stand up for a total stranger when they are being mistreated. Not my story, but my mom, since she's a school teacher. Kid came in with a huge rash in my mother's class. She thought it was herpes. Asked if he felt fine, and he replied that he had a really painful throat, oozing rash all over the kid's face. My mother rushed him to the nurse and the nurse freaked out. Turns out the kid had such a severe case of strep throat he had infection oozing from his skin. They called his parents and all the parent had to say was, "We already took him to the doctor, and we don't want to drive him back, he'll be fine." My mom reported it to child services and tried giving the kid some salt water. She feels so bad, but legally she can't do much other than that. This like 5-year-old kid emptied a 4-pint bottle of milk all over floor at supermarket where I worked, and her mum just stood there and watched. To add to that, the child managed to place the empty bottle in the center of this now 2-mile wide puddle, and the mum just looked at me and said, "You've got some cleaning up to do." Unbelievably rude. I handed her the mop and bucket and made her pay for the milk. Here in Belgium, new parents receive money from the government at the birth of each kid to help with the initial costs like diapers, baby bottles, strollers, etc. It's about 2,000 kid, if I'm not mistaken. Well, I knew a guy who decided to have a kid because he needed the money to buy a new computer to play games the whole day, obviously. At a movie theater, sitting in the 4th or 5th row with friends. This was a rated R movie. 2 kids, maybe 4 and 7-year-old, are in the audience. They start playing and running back and forth at the front of the theater. The 4-year-old falls and starts to cry. The parent doesn't bother to get up. My friend finally went to console the child after a few minutes. The mother never bothered to get up. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.